Hey everybody, thanks for joining into the podcast. This is my very first guest that I will be having on this podcast. Hans Amato, is that how you pronounce the last name?
That it is it, yes.
Awesome. So Hans is the creator of menelite.com. He has a tremendous amount of resources and information on this website, everything from gut optimization, energy optimization, hormone optimization, and much, much more. He has spent a tremendous amount of time researching different areas, a lot of it regarding the repeat philosophy of trying to optimize dopamine, lower serotonin, and optimize overall thyroid and glucose oxidation. Um, Hans, my first question for you, thank you, of course, for joining the show.
It's my pleasure,
And
man.
I'm curious from a personal standpoint, if you originally got into this, creating Menelite, if it was just always something that was of natural interest to you throughout schooling, or if it was something where, you had a health crisis and kind of had to dive deep because you were unable to have anybody help you, and you kind of had to, like myself, go through the published peer-reviewed articles yourself and kind of go through the rabbit hole and figure out what the heck's going on. So are you kind of a natural interest or out of necessity?
I would say it's out of natural interest.
Yeah.
Like when I was younger, I wasn't really interested. Like I wasn't a motivated person, so I wasn't reading up on these things. But my dad was into this kind of stuff, so he had books, and it was very interesting for me to listen to what he was saying. And I was also reading a book, but when I wasn't with him, I wasn't interested in it anymore. But then after I finished with college, I was like automatically drawn to it, and then I immediately started reading more studies about it and how can I learn more about. Like I was very fundamental in my knowledge. Like after college, it's like what's insulin, what's glucose, what's glycemia, no, all those basic stuff. I didn't know anything of that, and I was just like really devouring the research because I found it like so interesting. So I guess that helped me because then I didn't start out with health problems or as much like okay, I was not as privileged when I grew up, meaning I wasn't big built, I wasn't tall, didn't have my androgens in check, I was under eating, I had high cortisol, I had lots of different problems, but I didn't consider myself like a sick child, if you know what I mean. So I didn't feel it necessary to go to the doctor or find solutions to my problems. I thought it was normal. So then, as life went on, we went through stressors. Then health started to get worse and worse and worse. And that's when I kind of like was lucky that I was interested in this because then it automatically helped me to do the research that I needed to fix myself. So yeah.
So it sounds kind of like you're similar to a lot of athletes that get into this work, doing intermittent fasting or maybe keto or doing what is trendy at the time, eat less, move more, that kind of mentality of what everybody's telling us is the healthy thing to do. Like, right? Like if you run more, you're going to get healthier. Your heart's going to work better. If you eat less, you're going to be leaner and you'll be healthier. You'll be able to, have more insulin sensitivity and all of this stuff that is thrown around in the media. And it sounds like you, through your own experience, have learned pretty quickly that that's not the case.
Yeah, luckily for me, I never bothered too much to listening to other people. So when I felt like someone said dairy is bad for you, I was like, you know what? I enjoy dairy. I'm not going to limit it out of my diet. Or like if I felt something that was too difficult to do, I was just like, I'm not going to do it. Like I don't like running, so I'm not going to do running. I would rather stick to weight training. So at least in that sense, I was like, I'm not going to listen to everything everyone says. But yeah, there was a period where I was like, the research around ketogenic diets was very interesting, and it was like ketones, and it was like lots of benefits, all of those stuff. So in theory, it sounds very, very good. So in the hype of the keto, time, I was like very interested in it. But then luckily I found Repeat, and my experience with the keto diet wasn't very good. So then everything started to click for me. It's like, okay, this is why it's not good. This is why it's not working. And actually, I'm not feeling as good as I think I am. So then it just transitioned off and everything like, got better and felt better. So I would say at least I'm happy that rather soon in my journey, I came across the information that was on point. I would say that was like most helpful for me without listening to Marcola, listening to this guy, listening to that guy, and you're all over the place. It's kind of like that's when I kind of like found Repeat. So I view him as the lighthouse where you read research and you kind of like gauge it like according to his principles. Like obviously you do research beyond his viewpoints, but always kind of like is that kind of like in line with what he's saying? I'm not saying, if he's not saying it's okay, you don't do it. It's like you obviously experiment and see what finds for you. And that was kind of like my experience and journey there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So digging into today's topic, we are going to be discussing mostly about TRT alternatives. So in the space of health right now, it's very trendy for even young men to be hopping on TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, for those who are not aware. And whether it's for uh, getting better in their sport or for quote unquote, anti-aging purposes, it seems that a lot of people are hopping on this stuff, even as people as young as me or younger. You're hearing more and more. I don't know if you're familiar with More Plates, More Dates. Awesome
Yeah.
resource that talks a lot about this, but you see teenagers even starting to go on tren or TRT or different things to gain muscle and try and live their teenage years longer, basically by keeping these super physiological levels of hormones. But unfortunately, this is really misguided and has caused a lot of pain for a lot of people. And so my hopes for today's podcast is kind of giving people information on how we can still help optimize those steroids, testosterone, DHT, keeping estradiol in check, and all these other hormones in a healthier way, without getting some of the negative aspects of TRT. So I guess my first question to you would be to explain to the audience why TRT is not always a good idea and what some of the negatives of it would be.
Yeah. Okay. So there are a few ways that you can do TRT. There's patches, there's creams, you can do injections. So every clinic will vary from the kind of like the approach that they do. Some people will give you TRT alone. Some people will give you additional things like aromatase inhibitor. They will give you HEG, and different clinics also view the reference ranges of these things differently. So some people will give you TRT and your testosterone goes very, very high. They think it's normal. Some people will be okay if your estrogen goes very high as well. No problem about it. Whereas other people would say, let's keep it in a certain range. So that varies a lot. And I'm not saying, for me, it's okay for me if people use, TRT. Like lots of people improve their life, their enjoyment, their well-being when they go on TRT. So I would say it's an amazing thing to use, like get people out of that hole. And a lot of people actually do quite good on it. They don't really get a lot of side effects, but there is a group that gets side effects. And that could be because when you're using testosterone, it's more a downstream hormone. So in the whole cascade of steroidogenesis, you get cholesterol is being converted into pregnenolone, progesterone, DHA, and then testosterone, and then DHT. So those are upstream going downstream. So the more downstream something you use, the more likely it is to inhibit in the negative feedback loop GnRH and luteinizing hormone. So you shut yourself down. So that's one of the side effects, because now you're not producing one of those pro hormones such as pregnenolone and progesterone, all of which do have very strong effects, not just in the body, but specifically also in the brain. So this is when men, they go on TRT and they feel good for a while, but then things start to go backwards and they feel depressed, they feel anxious, they don't feel the benefits they got on TRT. So this is because their pro hormones are dropping. Now, some clinics will give people HEG, and that will sort of like take care of the problem in a way. And most people are content for that. But then I've did a podcast on this why I'm not a big fan of HEG, is because it stimulates the aromatase to a big extent. So people should be aware that if your testosterone goes up, your estrogen will go up more. You have to keep an eye on that. And I think as most doctors like, okay, let's just give you an aromatase inhibitor. But most people, or a lot of people, experience side effects when it comes to pharmaceutical aromatase inhibitors, which isn't just it blocks aromatase, it does many other things as well. And each aromatase inhibitor has its own side effects. Although like some of the most common side effects include like joint pain or lack of libido, something like that. But I would not say it's because of a lack of estrogen, because if you look at the studies, the doses that you're using, they're not crashing your estrogen. They're maybe taking it in the 20s or the 10s. They're never tanking it very low. And when you compare it to studies where they use DHT, they're using very high doses and they're completely crashing your estrogen. People don't experience the same side effects on DHT than when using a aromatase inhibitor. So that's kind of like how I view it. Like you can use testosterone, but it's beneficial to use pro hormones along the way as well, because you're shutting yourself down. Or you can use HEG, but like I'm not a fan of that, and it has side effects, for including promote the progression of cancer, for example, stimulating angiogenesis and the vascularization. So cancer secrete HEG to promote its own growth. So if you use it in TRT protocol, now like this is important to mention because a lot of men, when they get to 40s, 50s, have a high risk of getting some kind of cancer. They have some kind of microtumor or tumor or cancer, like a lot of men's concerned about prostate cancer. So I think adding in HCG is not a good idea.
All right, sorry everybody about that. So we're back with Hans. We just had a little connection issue. So Hans was just going over some of the issues with HCG use because of the spike in estradiol as well as other estrogens. And I just want to quickly brief everybody who's listening in. What's also tricky about this whole thing with testosterone and HCG is that a lot of times clinics are simply looking at estradiol. They're not looking at sensitive estradiol or estriol or estrone or estrone sulfate. There are many other, or prolactin. There are many other blood work things that you can use to check how much estrogen you have in your body. And unfortunately, tissue levels, just like with androgens, don't always indicate what's actually, when you take a blood work, it doesn't always indicate what's happening at the tissue level. So whenever you're doing something that is known to aromatize quite significantly, it can be tricky to titrate that properly depending on the person, depending on how lean they are, depending on how heavy they are, how much muscle mass they have, how much, estrogen receptor levels can vary person to person, which will affect how sensitive they are to estrogen in the blood and tissue. So yeah, keep going, Hans. This is great stuff.
So just to finish my thought on HEG, it's a great risk factor for cancer because it stimulates angiogenesis. It means that it's growing new blood cells to the tumor, so it's feeding it more glucose, more fuel, more oxygen. So its growth is really, really accelerated, which makes it problematic. So people that are older at higher risks of getting cancers, microtumors, I think it's best to avoid HEG. And these are exactly the people that go for TRT because they have the lower testosterone. So my take on it is that there's also some evidence that this is more in the minority of people that experience side effects with TRT, but it's worth mentioning is that there's evidence in animals to show that some animals can't maintain high androgens. They get an increase in reactive oxygen species. So these animals have, so what testosterone and androgens basically do is they increase antioxidant defense systems, but they also increase ROS production. So in this case, they get a greater increase in ROS than in the antioxidant defense systems. So that's why men can't increase their testosterone naturally to a high level because the body is downregulating it in a defense mechanism. So now you go and add in testosterone on top of that. That's creating more ROS, because you're bypassing that step, that autoregulatory effect. And you're creating more ROS, and that's causing problems. So now also estrogen increases. Now estrogen is not good. We can talk a little bit more about estrogen later in the podcast as well. But some people think estrogen is not a problem, but there is evidence to show that it is problematic. But I'm not going to go into that. But that was basically what I would say, that it's beneficial, but there is a minority of people that do get side effects on it. It's like comparing it to SSRI drugs, although that's not actually a good, what's the right word? I'm blanking the right name. An analogy, sorry about that. The right analogy, because SRI drugs increases serotonin, which is not good, but let's say about 10 to 20 to 30% of people on SSRI drugs get side effects. Similarly, people on testosterone, there is a percentage of people that get side effects, and either they experience no benefits or they actually end up worse than where they started, no matter how much they tweak their protocol, switched between different kinds of administration, checked all those different hormones. So in my opinion, that's one of the reasons why I would never want to do it. And for me, that's kind of like, if I wanted to do it, it would obviously be for building muscle, but I don't want to mess with something that has the potential to have long-term side effects.
Sure. Yeah, that was a great explanation of all of that. I think that will be very helpful for people if they're deciding on whether to go on TRT or not. It is a big decision, and I don't think it should be taken lightly, but I think Hans and I would both agree that it's at the end of the day, it's your decision to do. And yeah, it's not like it's impacted everybody negatively. It's just, you need to understand the downstream metabolites of it, what you might have to supplement with further, which I think we could discuss next, is the neurosteroids that Hans briefly mentioned, of pregnenolone and DHEA particular. Those are very important to keep an eye on in blood work and just in symptoms. because those, as Hans was explaining, are higher up on the metabolite list of steroidogenesis. So when you supplement with something like testosterone, which is downstream, you have the potential of decreasing those levels over time. And those are important for the anxiolytic effects, so lowering anxiety, keeping a stable mood. So what's funny is a lot of times you'll hear these anecdotes of people going on testosterone or tren or something even crazier, and they get roid rage, or they get all fired up, or they have bouts of like manic, and they go from really ecstatic to really depressed, or their mood seems to fluctuate all the time, and people keep blaming testosterone as the cause of this directly, and it doesn't seem to pan out in research. That actually seems to show that testosterone typically is very beneficial for the mood and can help stabilize it. It's only when you have these other neurosteroids upstream from it decrease in the blood and body, that's what actually causes the issues with mental clarity and overall happiness, honestly. So do you want to explain that a little bit further of how to potentially use those supplements to aid in TRT?
Yeah, so I would just also say that testosterone has been shown to inhibit the adrenal gland. So people that have an excess of cortisol, that's beneficial. So they come back down to normal. But in a lot of cases, you see people that get very low levels of DHEA while having like moderate levels of cortisol. So DHEA is also very important because it converts into androstenedione. It makes sure, your estrogen is in check, if that's even important. And it also converts to androsterone, which is kind of like the backdoor pathway for creating DHT. So the thing is, a lot of people think like, it's DHT, it's like DHT and allopregnanolone. Those are the major neurosteroids, but there's so many different metabolites that can be converted down into different pathways. Like DHT and allopregnanolone can be interconverted through multiple different steps. So it gets very complicated. You can't just focus on one metabolite and this metabolite and that metabolite. For example, when it comes to hair loss, there's so many different metabolites that's going on. It's prolactins, estrogens, DHT is different metabolites of DHT, the adrenal gland. So it's a point what I'm trying to make is that DHEA is actually very important. Like you mentioned, some people use testosterone or they want to use it for longevity, but they use it for like this really large doses, which first of all is, unphysiological. It's too high. You're creating problems, and then you're suppressing all of those, what Ray Pete like to call those youth steroids. So those are the things that actually keep you in a youthful state, and that's pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA. So if you use testosterone in relatively higher doses, you will drop your DHEA. So DHEA is necessary to convert into androsterone. So DHEA sulfate is a good sign to show that you're not in a stress state. So once you're becoming stressed, okay, I should preface to say, acutely when you become stressed, cortisol and DHEA levels go up and DHEA sulfate levels go up. But with chronic stress, DHEA sulfate levels will drop back down and you will end up with low levels. So DHEA sulfate in itself is a good hormone to promote mood dopamine. It's a GABA antagonist, so it will help to keep you alert. Whereas then it converts into androsterone, which is a GABA agonist, which has strong antidepressant and anti-anxiety effects in the body. So you need a DHEA. It's very important. And DHEA has been studied a lot for when it comes to life extension and enhancing lifespan, or at least health span as well. They use it like it was widely marketed as anti-aging supplement back in the day, but I would say that claims are basically now overblown. But then obviously the rest of the steroids like pregnenolone and progesterone, all of these have effects in the brain, not just on a neurotransmitter level, but also on a structural level, where they make sure your cells are producing energy efficiently, they're communicating messages effectively, like specifically in the nervous system, they ensure the health of the nervous system. Another example would be progesterone being very good against stress as well, being pro-GABA, and actually it helps to optimize the glutamate system, which is very necessary for, first of all, libido, the sexual function, and constant focus and mood. If you get too much glutamate activity, which can be promoted by estrogen, you get excitotoxicity damage in the brain. So you can get neurotoxic damage. And this is what I think happened to a lot of people when they get on TRT. They get some kind of neurological damage, either to the dopaminergic system, and that's where they get a permanent decrease in libido and sexual function. So there's a lot of things going on, and I wouldn't try to make as if I know everything. All these pathways is very, very complicated and broad to explain, but the most important thing to realize is that these pro hormones like pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA are extremely important for cognitive function and health as well. Bone mineral density, muscle mass, insulin sensitivity, glucose disposal, lipid management, liver health, organ health. All of these are anabolic to organs, and your organs have the highest metabolic rate in the body. So if you have those unopposed and you have high cortisol and low androgens, including these prohormones, your organs will start to shrink. And if you like, your organs control almost everything in the body. Like if you don't have a liver, you're gonna die. So if your liver starts to shrink, it will not be working optimally anymore. And that's what cortisol does. And whereas the androgens are protective and they will increase your organs, increase your metabolic rate, improve health in general.
Yeah, there's a super interesting article I just read the other day about vitamin E and testosterone together was able to ameliorate fatty liver disease. So yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. I think that was a really great breakdown of the different benefits of pregnenolone and DHEA. I think going from here, let's try and start discussing, like, for those who are not sure about TRT, so maybe they have, mid-level to low levels of testosterone, but it's not hypogonadal. They don't need TRT right away. They're just maybe an athlete like myself who had suboptimal levels for their age and are just looking to boost things up, whether it be for libido or muscle growth, or just longevity. What are some alternatives to TRT that people could use to try and raise their testosterone levels, as well as DHT and DHEA and pregnenolone as well? I guess we could add into there, but specifically testosterone, let's start with and go from there.
Okay. There's not a lot of alternatives that work very well, but I can say, like, if you want to use a supplement, then prohormones can help to increase it. But the first thing that I would look at would be diet and lifestyle. Always your nutrition. What's your diet looking like? Do you have enough of your macronutrients, enough of the micronutrients? That's very important, because a lot of people's diets, aren't very good. They consume gut irritating foods. That's promoting inflammation. Anything that promotes inflammation either inhibits proper brain function. So it inhibits the hypothalamus and the pituitary and also the Leydig cells of the test. So you get inhibition of the whole cascade to downregulate testosterone. So first of all, are you consuming gut irritating foods? Are you consuming enough cholesterol and fats for testosterone production? Are you consuming enough micronutrients? Because your vitamins and minerals are essential for producing not just testosterone, but also energy, neurotransmitters, everything. Like, again, people love to focus on only one thing, but like everything's connected. You have to focus on every single thing. But testosterone is like this key word with people's like, I want to optimize my testosterone, but you have to optimize everything. You have to look at your diet and lifestyle. It's like, okay, what's your lifestyle like? Do you get out in the sunlight? That's very important. Get your vitamin D levels up. Are you walking? Are you doing stress management? Are you doing proper breathing? Are your posture in check? Are you doing exercise? That's one of the best things that you can do. Are you doing exercise correctly? I think that's more importantly here. And that's basically the first things that I would look at. And that can be overwhelming, but if you take it on a step-by-step basis, it's really easy. Like, let's say this month, I'm going to be eliminating gluten, for example. This month, I'm going to be eliminating everything that's high in fiber, like beans and the lentils and those kind of stuff. So it's simple. Like, within a year, you've remodeled your whole life, got your diet and lifestyle in check, and sometimes just by eating more carbohydrates, you can get a big jump in testosterone, because your testosterone is very dependent on glucose oxidation, proper glucose oxidation, and not being in a fasted state. Every time you fast, you're not eating enough, you're over-exercising, your testosterone levels go down, because your body senses fasting, senses I should go in a preserve everything. But when you're in a fed state, and this also comes down to calories, not just intermittent fasting or fasting, your body can start to upregulate it. So even the Hadza, they don't really do intermittent fasting or fasting, but they're very, very active. And they have lower levels of testosterone than the sedentary men in America. So something like exercise can downregulate it, because your body has to say, like, okay, I have to make decisions where I'm going to dedicate that energy to. So you're active, so I'm going to dedicate that energy to the muscles, exercise, keep you alive and active. But men in America, most men that are sedentary, they can have that energy go to somewhere else, like producing testosterone. So the point here is that you want to be in a fed state. Make sure you have that carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the signal that you are not in a fasted state. And that's when you can get a decrease in cortisol and an increase in testosterone. So cortisol also inhibits proper steroidogenesis. And getting that low will disinhibit your steroidogenic pathway. And that's kind of like the first things that I would look at. And once you got those in check, it's kind of like you don't even need supplements. That's for the majority of people. They don't need supplements. But then again, you can look at chronometer. What am I missing in my diet? Am I missing some of these vitamins and minerals? I can supplement that. Some people can just take a multivitamin and mineral just to make sure they cover everything. But I like to say food has so many different components that we don't even know about in science. Like let's say an oyster, it contains like 500 compounds that can be beneficial to your health. But you take a supplement that's like 20 of those, you're still missing out on the 400 and something much compounds that can be beneficial to you. It's like always want to make sure you get that food in your system, all that micronutrients. That will have a much more powerful effect.
Sure.
And then supplements, I feel like micromanaging. I'm working with this guy. He's helping me training with my coach, sprinting. He's helping me getting my form right. And then I'm reading and I'm learning more about how the body works. And then I ask him about what about this exercise and that exercise? Wouldn't this help me improve me? It's like, we don't want to micromanage everything. Let's do something that's going to have the biggest effect overall. And you don't have to micromanage it, because what we're doing here is going to have a universal effect here. So it makes this thing absolute. So if you do all the diet and lifestyle modifications, you won't even need supplements. And I've noticed it myself that when you are in a suboptimal state, supplements is wonderful. It can help you get you out of that stress state, can help you improve your sleep, all of those things that will improve testosterone. But once you are in a healthier state, you use a supplement, it's like, well, I don't even feel it anymore.
Yeah, super interesting. I think for a lot of people, one of my suggestions would be, as you've mentioned, like finding the balance, the proper dose of exercise. Like we all need some sort of exercise, but it all depends on how many calories we're getting in, how active we are at our jobs. This all will affect how much working out time we actually need. And some people need very little and some people need to rest completely. I know there's a lot of people out there that probably are going to listen to this that are manic, crazy triathletes or whatever it may be, that they need to be told like, take a couple weeks off of doing nothing and eating a lot of food and go on vacation. I think a lot of Americans in particular need to hear that advice of going on vacation, getting somewhere sunny, and having some fun in life, and not taking it so seriously. And that alone will be tremendously supportive for your hormone health. Because I think, as you said, a lot of people are trying to micromanage and do too many things at once, and that can cause more issues just from the stress of it, of thinking about things too much. I will just add that like sleep and sunshine are two huge ones. The more of that you can get, I think you'll always help yourself in every way, not just hormones.
Yeah, but I would just like to add, like you just mentioned about the environment, going on vacation. And I've talked about so many people that they feel so depressed, they feel without motivation in life, and all of those negative symptoms that people experience. And then they go on vacation. It's like, I was a new man, my libido was normal, my motivation, I was alive. It's like, well, all you might need is just environmental enrichment. Like you can modify your environment to kind of like recreate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so moving forward from here, we have discussed a couple times about hinted at your views on estrogen and why it can be detrimental. So let's dive deep back into that if you'd like, and discuss reasons to keep in mind where your estrogen levels are over time and see what those fluctuations can potentially do. What happens if they get too high? What happens if they get too low? Maybe if you have kind of your own suggested range of where you like to see it for your clients. Yeah, let's talk all things estrogen for a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So from the studies that I've seen, there's a lot of association studies. So this makes it difficult because they don't give a lot of men estrogen because it has side effects. They know it, but then you get a lot of association studies that associate high estrogen, but this always comes with low-ish testosterone. So you don't always know, like they use an aromatase inhibitor, so your estrogen goes down, but the testosterone goes up. It's like, which one is it that's doing all the benefits? But from I've seen the cutoff point is like, you don't want to go higher than 30 pg per ml, and even slightly below that when you have low testosterone. So even as low as 30 pg per ml can reduce your sexual function, give you ED. It can contribute to strokes, fractures. It can cause joint problems, basically contribute to cancer. That's a major problem when it comes to estrogen, is that it first of all, causes blood clotting, but it also causes growth of tissue, rapid growth, and it contributes to a wide variety of cancers, especially the thyroid. So first of all, if you start inhibiting the thyroid and you start becoming hypothyroid, I forgot to mention this specifically in the when I talked about testosterone, is that thyroid hormones are responsible for converting cholesterol into testosterone. So that's one of the major things that you want to improve first is your thyroid. So estrogen has an inhibitory effect on the thyroid on multiple levels, and it also produces cancer in the prostate, in the gut. It can cause basically problems everywhere. So an excess of estrogens is a problem, but it can be kind of combated when you have enough androgens in your system. That's why doctors is like, okay, if you use TRT and your estrogen goes up as well with the testosterone, it's not a problem because your testosterone is protective. But the thing is, like, now you have to think about, let's say estrogen contributes to vascular complications, but they say estrogen is protective for vascular, health. But how can high estrogen cause that in the presence of low androgens when it's supposed to be protective? But now you lower the estrogen, testosterone go up, and testosterone itself and DHT is protective against cardiovascular problems. How can estrogen be the good guy here? So the whole point is, like, it just makes everything easier when you optimize your hormone levels naturally. Like, typically what happens is when you are hypothyroid, your estrogen remains the same while your testosterone goes down. So now estrogen in a feedback loop inhibits the thyroid and the hypothalamus, so the whole steroidogenic cascade. So this is basically what happens when you go in a fasted state, testosterone goes down and estrogen remains the same. So kind of like it's an adaptive mechanism. But let's say you're not in a fasted state, you don't need that adaptation. You're going to remain in that hypothyroid, hypoandrogenic state unless you start lowering the estrogens, or at least that's why they use a drug called Clomid, which is the estrogen antagonist at the pituitary, to release more luteinizing hormone in that cascade, but it has side effects. So there's a herb that I'm really fond of that they use in China called Longdan Zigantang. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it works in a similar way where it antagonizes the estrogen receptor in the pituitary, similar to Clomid, and stimulate the whole steroidogenic cascade. It's apparently very, very effective for increasing testosterone levels. So estrogen is bad in many ways, and I would say there's no benefit to keeping it elevated. You just want to focus on getting your androgens right, because androgens can convert into what some people might consider as a necessary amount of estrogen. So if your androgens are in check, it will automatically convert into the necessary amount. But we also have to talk about blood levels versus tissue level. So there's a lot of times where I've seen people that have low estradiol, low estrone, low testosterone, but they have like zero luteinizing hormone. And then they use something like Clomid and they suddenly get a bump in luteinizing hormone and also testosterone. So obviously there's estrogen or something that's inhibiting the pituitary. So it's not releasing luteinizing hormone. So when they use Clomid, blocking the estrogen receptors, you get a spike in luteinizing hormone. So there's a lot of estrogen in the tissue, which you can't see in a blood test. So in the blood, those hormones are just acting as messengers. But you have to look in the tissue to really see what's going on. That's where the androgen receptors are. That's where the estrogen receptors are. Like, you can have 600 nanograms per deciliter testosterone, but you're very anabolic and androgenic. Why? Because you have a lot of androgen receptors. So the same thing with estrogens, that some people don't have a lot of estrogen receptors, whereas other people have a lot of estrogen receptors. So everyone will respond differently to the amount of estrogen that they have. And you have to look at the tissue estrogen, which you can't unless you probably do a biopsy, but I don't think that's the option for most people. And yeah, so it just comes down to optimizing your androgens. And testosterone converts into estradiol, DHEA convert into estrone, and estrone and estradiol can interconvert depending on the metabolism of the body. Some people have hyperconversion, other people don't. So again, it's basically complicated, but estrogen, like, I would say androgens are protective in all cases. I'm not that one of those proponents that would say tank your estrogen. I'm just one of those proponents that say let's keep it below 30, because there's studies that show that if it goes above 30, it contributes to a lot of issues. And some people might think like this guy doesn't and this guy doesn't have issues for that high estrogen, but everyone responds differently and can get problems from it. Like, let's say someone has sexual problems. Like, let's look at your hormones. Okay, your estrogen's a little bit high. That's one of the first things. Let's try to focus that on lowering that. I'm not going to recommend an AI. I'm going to say let's try some white button mushrooms. Let's get some sunlight. Like, in the past, I haven't gotten a lot of sunlight, and then I started having a lot of poofy nipples. So gyno is a symptom of elevated either prolactin and or estrogen. So getting a lot of sunlight increases dopamine, can help to lower or manage your estrogen prolactin that got rid of the poofy nipples. So you don't have to be extreme by managing your estrogen. Let's just do the right things with the diet and the lifestyle, and that will manage the hormones in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think one thing that a lot of people, again, neither of us are doctors. This is all just suggestions. We're not giving medical advice. I'll just put that out there just to be on the safe side. But I think one thing that a lot of TRT clinics are starting to catch on is that the administration and frequency of dosing, both the amount they're choosing to dose with, but also the frequency that they're choosing to pin or inject, they're starting to realize that by changing that frequency, depending on how much people are aromatizing, can be very beneficial as well. For people who decide to go that route, I really suggest looking into that further and really finding a clinic that understands the issues with too much aromatization and how you can mitigate that with perhaps lowering the dose, changing the ester, or changing the frequency at which you're injecting. All of those things can affect how much you're aromatizing.
Yeah. I should actually add, like, some of the things that stimulate aromatase are hyperinsulinemia, cortisol, and inflammation. So you can always say, like, those are the things that's promoting the problems. So if you just fix the hyperinsulinemia, cortisol, and inflammation, your estrogen will go back down. So if you artificially inhibit the aromatase, you won't really achieve the goal that you want, because you haven't dealt with the inflammation and hypercortisol. You need to address that first.
Yeah, I mean, I found that for myself. Like, um, I did a lot of experience, as we've kind of talked offline as well about this, but I did a couple experiments that I'll share in another podcast solosode episode, all about how I was able to raise my androgens using pregnenolone and DHEA. Super interesting anecdotal stuff that I'll get into in another case. But one thing that I noticed was that when my estrogen got high, I would try and use something like aromazine or some other anti-aromatase inhibitor. And I found that it would work maybe for a couple days, and then the high estrogen symptoms would all come back. And for me, I think what happens is once you start relying on these supplements, you don't look so much at your diet. You don't look so much at how you're training or how much sunshine you're getting, or a lot of guys on TRT who always have these elevated androgens constantly. Like, it's not just like a diurnal pattern for people who produce it naturally. They're like, you get a big spike in the morning, then it slowly decreases over time. These guys are just blasting and have 1,000+ nanograms per deciliter for multiple hours of the day. And what happens is when you feel like that and you have that naturally super physiological level, a lot of times you feel like Superman at the beginning, and then their diet starts to go to trash. Their exercise stops, their sleep, they stop sleeping as much because they think they can get away with it. And eventually this creeps up on you. And no matter what supplement you try and take to, balance that out, it really comes back to getting to the fundamentals again. And that's the only way you're going to ever recover from this imbalance hormonally. So that's, yeah, absolutely. I think that's what Hans has been saying this whole time, is it really comes down to the diet and lifestyle first. And once you get those in check, if you still think you need some sort of supplemental protocol, then do your research and figure that out later.
Yeah.
Cool.
Agreed.
We're coming up in an hour. I really appreciate your time. I would just ask if there's anything else that you think would be important for people to keep in mind with all things testosterone and hormone related.
I would just say one thing that you mentioned is that those guys, when they inject large amounts of testosterone, they have this big spike in testosterone for multiple hours. But depending on the ester, you can have that blast, that high levels of testosterone for days, if not weeks, depending on the ester. And you need that natural curves. And I think that's when people start to get side effects, because they have no variation in their hormone levels. Like your cortisol goes up and it goes down before bed. You can't sleep if it's high all the time. So I think there's more research that needs to be done, obviously, but I would say there's also side effects if you get that testosterone that high all the time. There needs to be some sort of fluctuation. But yeah, I just want people to know that, it's actually very simple to make sure your testosterone is in check. It just comes down to diet, your nutrition, and your lifestyle. That's most important. But if you're in a very stressed state, and you really need something, then I would make sure that you manage your inflammation. But it comes back to the gut. Like make sure, because stress inhibits digestion. So first of all, you have to make sure you consume stuff that's very easy to digest, but that's also micronutrient dense. So you get your micronutrients, you get your macronutrients, and you use some kind of supplement that help you to manage the stress and the inflammation, and obviously avoid everything that causes inflammation: endotoxins, polyunsaturated fatty acids. Um, Too much stress causes inflammation, all of those stuff. So it's simple, but I'm not against supplements. I'm pro supplements. Some people might need supplements if their situation requires that. And there are certain that's very beneficial. Like ashwagandha can be helpful for some people, but it might cause some sort of a numbing. And like I mentioned, that longan, zigantang can be helpful for stimulating luteinizing hormone. Like your experiment with the pro hormones combined with the vitamin K, I should add, I think was kind of like that factor that really boosted your testosterone really high, because the vitamin K obviously stimulates SDAR in the testes, converts cholesterol into, or at least transports the cholesterol into the testes. That's kind of like the rate limited step. So there's nifty tricks that you can do, but I would say for most people, just stick to the basics. And it's not a problem if you go on TRT for a small duration just to get yourself back up to normal, because some people want to feel some sense of they got control before they can start changing their diet and lifestyle. So if you go on TRT, make sure that you either use pregnenolone or HEG for the short run, because you don't want to shut yourself down when on TRT, because then it will be much more difficult to get off of TRT, do a PCT. It's not guaranteed to give you results. And that's kind of like what I would say, like, it's fine to do it like TRT for a while, but I would get off of it, and I would say that's kind of like the most beneficial way of going about it.
Yeah, that's a really huge point. Just to reiterate, is like this is not a lifelong commitment. A lot of doctors out there are still saying that if you go on TRT, it's a lifelong commitment. You can't go back from there, and that's just not proven. There's many ways, whether you choose to do, the more mainstream way of restarting the boss with HCG, or if you choose to use pregnenolone and DHEA, there are many alternatives that you can use to stimulate your natural production again. It might take time. It does come with its own issues at times, as we've discussed briefly, but it's not a lifelong commitment, and there are ways to get back to your natural state if that's something you're looking for. Hans, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you coming on and discussing this. I think it's going to be very helpful for whoever chooses to listen. And I'd love to get on again and some point and go over some things more in depth with you. So
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I think there's a lot more we can talk about, specifically more into the DHD area that we didn't get to cover in this part. So again, thanks for having me, man. It's a really fun conversation.
yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye.